In the last lesson, we talked about jobs. Let's now go into detail and describe those jobs and the workplaces. Hello and welcome back to another lesson from Simple-ESL. As always, we have now got the vocabulary help sheets in the description below, along with helpful worksheets, all the links in the description. But we've got a busy lesson, so let's crack on. So, in the previous lesson, we talked about jobs. So, it was a vocabulary lesson where we went through all the different jobs, or a good selection. Now we need to be able to talk about those with people. So if someone asked you, what is your job or what do you do, how would you respond? And we've had this structure in the past. First you would go with the subject, that's yourself. I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Okay? So I, if I was answering the question, I'd go I. Then the verb to be, which changes depending on the subject. We've done this in the past. I am, you are, he, she, it is, we, they are. Okay? So, I'm answering the question. So far, what job do you do? So far I have said, I am, and then the job. So, you can see it changes once again depending on the build-up. So, I am a scientist. So, before scientist, which we learned in the last lesson, or for example, teacher, you would have a. This changes a little bit depending on the first letter of the noun. So, if it is engineer, for example, that is what we would call a vowel. Okay? And before those, you use an. So, A, E, I, O, U, you would use an. So, if you were an engineer, I would say, you are an engineer. He is an engineer. I am an engineer. Okay? So, you are a scientist. He, she, it is a scientist. Now, it changes with we and they. Okay? Because as a group of people, we need to create what we've done in the previous lesson, which is a plural. So, we, they, we'll say we for now. We are, but we wouldn't be a scientist because we're not one. We aren't one person being a scientist. There's many. It's more than one. It's two. We are scientists. And we've touched on this in the previous lesson. So let's go into more detail with this. We can see the job options there. A before a consonant. That is anything other than a vowel as a consonant. So, scientist is an example of this. S, a scientist. An engineer before a vowel. A, E, I, O, U are vowels. An engineer. And there is no article before a plural. We just make it plural. Scientists. And with the majority of nouns, it's as simple as adding an S after the word scientists. But there are some that don't quite follow that rule. We touched on that in a previous lesson. I'll put the link there. So go back and look at that if you want to brush up on the plurals. So there's that information there. That is how you would form the answer to the question, what job do you do? Or what do you do? There's our answers. Now, workplaces. These, quite simply, are the places where you work. So let's touch on some examples. We have a building site. So builders and engineers might work on a building site. A farm. Farmers would work on a farm. Now if you notice those two, we use the example of on. We work on a farm, on a building site. These are examples of when you use on before the workplace. But these, a hospital, we don't work on a hospital. We work in a hospital. The majority of workplaces would be in. I think a good example is usually when it's outside, it's on. When it's inside, it's in. I work in a hospital. A laboratory. Once again, we work in a laboratory. And they are scientists. We practiced that already. Laboratory, they are scientists. Office. I work in a office. Nuh-uh. I work in an office. A-E-I-O-U, it would be an. I work in an office. A restaurant. So if you're a chef or a waiter, you might work in a restaurant. So those are just some examples. Oh, one more. Forgot this one. School. Teacher. A teacher would work in a school. And isn't it terrible that I forgot we had school as an example? School. And theatre. Actors would work in a theatre. There's a different spelling. This is the UK spelling for theatre. Okay? A theatre. You've heard me say it a couple times. This is the structure. I work in or on a building site, and I've used the example which we went over, an office. So, using this structure, using the correct form of a or an, and then the place you work. I work in an office. I work in a laboratory. I work on a building site. And as I said, on, outside. In, inside. That tends to track. That tends to be a good rule to follow with that. So, once again, this structure. Subject. I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Work. This is where you work. Work in, work on. And here are my examples. Work in a school as a teacher. Work in an office. Work on a farm. Work on a building site. So, now not only can we answer the question what job we do, we could also answer the question and say where we work. Adding more detail to our answers will help, especially with any IELTS examinations. Here's a real simple answer to that question as well. You could just say if you work inside or outside. So, say your job is predominantly outside. Maybe you're a football coach or a runner, and that's your job. I work outside. And then you can describe with more information what the actual job is. But this builds up a nice image and sentence or paragraph. You work inside, as I am at the moment. I work inside. So you can describe a job by working inside or outside. So in the house, outside the house. There's the examples. You can also answer the question by saying who you work with. And what I mean by that, we've got the same structure. I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Work, and then the thing you work with. So, as a teacher, I work with children. As a chef, you work with food. In an office, he works with people. A group of farmers, they work with animals. So you can describe what the job is and what you do and who you work with. So this is a really handy and useful way to continue building that sentence and showing your fluency in English. So an example sentence. We're going to build this up. The person's asked, what do you do? What is your job? I am a scientist. I work in a laboratory. You could even say, I work with chemicals. And there's your sentence. You've answered the question. You've described the job and where the job takes place. You could even say I work inside. But I've described it by saying laboratory. I'm a teacher. I work with children. You could say I work in a school, but I've given an example. I work with children. Another good example of how you could write a sentence answering the question, what do you do? Or, what is your job? And here's a lovely example. It sounds so peaceful. I am a gardener. I work outside. A lovely example. And that is a good way to show how you can use the outside, inside. A gardener would work outside. You could say they work in a garden, but they're not always going to be in the same garden, so perhaps outside is a better description of that job. So, why not practice building that sentence? If you have a job or a dream job, you could say, I work in a, and then use this help sheet. I work in a hospital, a laboratory, and then match up the job to it. I am if you're in a laboratory, a scientist. If you're in a theatre, an actor. I am an actor. I work in a theatre. And build up your own sentence to answer the question, what do you do? Or what is your job? And once you can build up that sentence, you've got a nice description you can tell people. And as I said, very useful to start building these sentences for examinations like the IELTS and speech tests. So have a look at that this week. We're going to try and build on some more of these principles and ideas as we go forwards. But we're going to stop there for today. It's Friday. It's time for the weekend. Everyone, have a lovely weekend. Don't forget to click on the links in the description below. And if you enjoyed the video, please don't be afraid to subscribe. That way you won't miss a lesson. And a like is always helpful. But until next time, take care.